Okay, this is going to be a little bit divergent from my usual stuff in terms of mixing, obviously, but I feel it's important to go into because it is something that affects the industry and it's something that affects individuals in the industry, and it's certainly not something that's separate to the industry as a whole. So, with that out of the way, I'm going to go into piracy a little bit. Now, back in the 90s, there was a cost to piracy. Either you were dubbing a cassette and the blank cassette cost money, or you were dubbing a CD and the CD cost money, although it cost a lot less than the cassette and it took a lot less time to do it. But still, there was some kind of cost involved, right? There was an inconvenience. But once MP3s came around, and in New Zealand they popped up around 98, that was qualitatively a whole new ballpark, because suddenly people were putting 12 albums on a single CD, and just the scale of the entire problem changed. Before that, it was something that, it was picking stuff out of the music industry, but it wasn't severely damaging it, and what people made up for in terms of sales compensated for it. But as soon as Napster came along and all of that sort of jazz, really we started to see sales just plummet, and not plummet because music was getting bad or was significantly worse than it was before, because people in the music industry had gotten greedy or anything like that. It plummeted because people were pirating stuff and they could get it for free. It was convenient, it was easy to do, and it just sort of happened. Now around that time, when it sort of started taking off, I had people in university saying, oh yeah, it's just sticking it to the fat cats in the industry and this sort of thing, and it was just a joke. And the rhetoric hasn't changed over the years. It's still the same idiotic garbage, to be honest, and they're still blaming the music industry for pirating stuff. And I don't see how that works. You can't blame somebody else's greed for your greed. You really can't. As far back as the internet has been, there have been small-time artists who have been trying to break through, trying to make it, trying to succeed, trying to get attention. And initially, they were succeeding. There were websites like mp3.com, riffage.com, all these different sites that were taking sort of underground artists and pushing them up, and people were actually experiencing some level of success and sometimes getting some money from this. And they could do that because there was an unequal playing field, because they could charge less for their stuff, or they could give it away essentially for free, compensated by ads, versus these big name artists who would charge you $20 for a CD. So because of that unequal playing field, it meant that the smaller artists actually had a chance of people hearing them. People would take a risk on stuff they didn't know, because they could either get it for cheap or for free. But once MP3s kicked in full force, and particularly Napster and BearShare and what have you, things just plummeted. And they didn't just plummet for the big name artists, they plummeted for the smaller artists more than anything else. Since then, it's been almost impossible to sell music if you're an underground artist and you haven't really gotten somebody pushing you out there. Most days nowadays, people can give their stuff away for completely free, and it's still really hard to get people to listen to it. That wasn't always the case, because there was that unequal pay grade there. And that same principle applies across everything. Plugins. There are hundreds, perhaps thousands of free, often extremely high quality plugins out there, and yet a lot of people will go around pirating VSTs, pirating this plugin format, the other plugin format, whatever, because they're just sort of lazy and they just want to have that particular thing. They've been told that it's good. They don't want to spend any time looking at the other options. And I'm sorry if this is insulting anybody, but to be honest, the driving factor in this stuff is usually greed, convenience, laziness, right? And if you don't have those things, then people will look into the free alternatives, or they will look into the cheaper alternatives. If you have a plugin manufacturer who is selling their stuff for $200, and then you have a small-time player here, some kind of nifty startup that's doing a very similar thing but slightly different and they're doing it for $25, that company has a chance. But piracy levels the playing field. It means that these people don't get any money, these people don't get any money, but usually what piracy does is it increases the mainstream dominance of players who are already active in the scene. People won't check out the smaller players, for the most part, unless they're quite ethical, if they can get these bigger players for free, right? The big names. So it distresses me to see not just musicians but all artists pirating stuff. Visual artists pirate music. I know a lot of visual artists and they all pirate music. Musicians pirate DAWs, they pirate plugins, and it hurts everybody. If you go and you take a free plugin and you say, okay, I'm going to use this and it's free and it's great, I might give a tip to the guy, or I might throw a little bit of money his way on PayPal, that's fine, but primarily I'm doing it for free. And that's great because the person has said, I'm putting this out there, I'm willing to put it out there for free, I'm happy to do that, and I'm happy for you to use it, that's great. But if you've got somebody who's put stuff out there and said, no, I put a lot of time and energy into this, this is how I'm trying to earn my living, this is how I'm trying to get by in the world, I do my best to make stuff as good as it can be, and so I want you to pay for it. And if you say, no, I don't care about you, it's just being unkind. And that's what it comes down to at the end of the day. Piracy isn't about how much money you've got, it's not about whether or not you feel it's morally righteous, it's about being kind to others, essentially. And at this point I can hear a bunch of people saying, oh yeah, but the fat cats in the music industry. To be honest, even if 90% of the people in the music industry or the TV industry or the movie industry were just soulless corporate shills, and I've seen zero evidence of that to date. There's certainly some bad people in those industries, there's bad people in every industry, right? Particularly at the higher echelons on power. That's just how things progress. But that doesn't mean that you get to punish everybody else in that industry for that one person. But even if that was the case, blaming somebody else's, blaming your greed or your laziness or your unwillingness to try alternatives on somebody else's greed is not of ethical value. That's just eye for an eye stuff, which leaves the whole world blind, as the saying goes. So that's more or less my rant on the subject. Some people make the excuse for piracy to say, oh well, some people don't have money. Yeah, sure, some people don't have money. That's why we have thousands of free plugins and many free DAWs, and which can run on computers that people are throwing out. As long as you've got a computer, you can make music for free no matter what. And that's been the case all the way through. In the late 90s and the early 2000s, there were free DAWs. I was using Tracker software in the late 90s. So from my perspective, there's really no excuse on financial grounds, and there never has been. And the same thing goes for consumption of media. There's tons of people on Vimeo, other content channels, who are trying to get their stuff out there, creating great work, often much more soulful and much more interesting than what you'd find on mainstream TV or mainstream cinema, dying to get your attention, and you're not giving that to them. And if you're pirating stuff instead of giving attention to these guys, it's the same thing again. The dominant players get all the attention, they get more publicity, smaller guys get screwed. But with piracy, everybody loses. Alright, that's my rant.